into people who tell me they're great leaders because they manage change. They know how to manage change well. But I tend to be dubious. I think to myself, the real leaders are the people who say to me that they have leadership ability because they shape change. They shape the change going on in their community in order to achieve the outcomes that are not only profitable, but rewarding emotionally and for the entire community. And again, there's so much change. You know it on the ground here, but let me tell you that the change is across the nation. In the political arena, we've seen so much change. You know, you go back, I guess, 15 years now to the 2000 election, you know, all the kind of tumult we had, the Supreme Court deciding an election, then you come forward from that to 9/11, then the nation going to war, Afghanistan and Iraq, and then you come forward from that and you know we went through a tremendous economic recession. It's very slow, recovery still going on. So you understand that we are in an era of tremendous change. But sometimes I think because we all live it, we don't even understand that from a historic perspective, this will be seen as a moment of change in the national life. And we see it on the ground in terms of some of the issues that we've talked about earlier today, in terms of stagnant wages, in terms of income inequality, in terms, we were watching that video about the charter school, in terms of the kind of shift in terms of educational opportunity and what it means for people later in their lives. I remember looking at the 2010 census and being amazed at the amount of change that was being reported. I had no idea we're a country now of more than 300 million people. I thought, I don't know why, but I thought the country was getting smaller in some way, but in fact the country's growing rapidly. And then when I looked inside the census report to see, well, why is the country growing so rapidly, they talked about things like life expectancy. But then I thought, well, what about birth rates? Because if you look at the white population in the United States today, the birth rate is declining. And I thought, well, don't be silly. Look at the black birth rate. That must be it. And, well, no, the black birth rate is flat to declining. I thought, oh, wait a minute, you forgot. Hispanics are now the second largest racial group in the country. It must be Hispanics, that their birth rate must be growing rapidly. So I look at the Hispanic birth rate, and the line is slightly going upward, but not substantially. So I called over to the Census Bureau and I said, I don't understand how we're growing so quickly as a country. And they said, oh, well, go back to the appendix. Look at the birth rate of immigrants. Sure enough, that was a clearly climbing line. And then they said, no, but don't stop there. Look at the birth rate for children of immigrants. Wow. You look at that chart, the line's going straight up through the roof. And you come to understand there are people who believe in America, who will fight to get to America, and who are having children in the belief that their children will inherit the greatness of America. And you think, wow, this is where the growth is coming? No wonder it's so unsettling for all of us who live in America and see the change and see the new faces. But at the same time, as Dan was saying earlier, those people are a reason for optimism in the sense that they believe in the American dream. They've come here with the hope of achieving it. Nonetheless, their presence is unsettling. I'll tell you something else I saw in that census report that so interested me. I had no clue. I'm a journalist too. But it indicated that a quarter of the American population today is under the age of 18. Again, absolutely clueless. I don't deal with people under 18. They don't vote. They don't give money, you know? I mean, seriously, I just don't know them. I mean, I remember when Obama was running for president, people would make fun of some of his events because you'd get young people to come and it would look like a rock concert and they would treat him like a god and all this kind of stuff. But again, I just don't know young people. But in looking at the census, it occurred to me, how can you be a journalist and not understand what's driving young people today? So I went and I looked at, well, who are these young people? And as I indicated, a lot of them are immigrants, disproportionately people of color. We're now at a point in American society where most of the people being born are no longer white in the country. And I thought, I've got to have some experience with young folks, ask them about politics and about their dreams. And I picked a place in the middle of the country. I went out to Minnesota, went to a public high school. And my initial thought was, so if there's more diversity, so you're going to have like groups of the black kids, the Hispanic kids, whatever, the white kids here and there. I get into this high school, you know what, the kids pretty much, they mix it up in terms of race. But they do have all sorts of cliques, the goths, the athletes, the hipsters, everybody has that kind of group. And in terms of politics, I would ask about it, and they would look at me with glazed eyes, like, mister, we don't know what you're talking about. We're not interested. We definitely don't watch Fox News, But they don't read the paper. They don't listen to NPR. They're just not interested. I mean, they're into music and their videos. In fact, when I said to one of my colleagues, I said, did you realize a quarter of the population is under 18? He said to me, have you been to the movies recently? There are a lot of vampires out there, buddy. They're not making movies for me and you. And I'll just be very blunt with this crowd. I mean, when I said to my wife the same thing, she said to me, have you been to the mall recently? The stores during the recession that have done well tend to be stores like the Gap, Abercrombie & Fitch, Old Navy, that are selling to younger people. She said, you don't wear blue jeans much anymore, but buddy, if you went and tried on a pair, let me tell you, they wouldn't fit your butt. Let me tell you that right now. So off I go to interview these young people who really don't want to talk, and I run into a woman who sent her children to this school, Washburn High, in the 70s. She was now working at the school. And in fact, she had attended the school in the 70s, what I should say, and then sent her children to the school in the 90s. And she was now working at the school, and I said to her, I really have come up flat here. What do you think's the big difference at Washburn High 1970s to today? And she said to me, Juan, it's so obvious. How could you not notice? She said, you asked to meet with the top students here, and we brought 10 people in the room. What did you notice? I said, oh, they're nice people. What are you talking about? She said, no, hold on. She said, you asked to meet with the student leaders. And we brought another group of 10 into the room. What did you notice? I said, I give up. She said, no. You met the top student athletes, the people who are going to go on and play sports at Division I schools. What did you notice? I said, okay, I give up. What do you think I should have noticed? She said, well, how could you not notice that when you met the top students here, students with the top grades, getting the top scores on the SATs, going off to the Ivy League, that 8 out of 10 of them were young women? When you met with the student leaders, how could you not notice that 7 out of the top 10 were women? And even with the athletes, after Title IX, 5 of the 10 people we brought into the room to meet you, young women. And I got to tell you, for me, it was like someone opened the window. I just hadn't understood what was going on. I was like, wow, she's right. I mean, it's an incredible change in all of our lifetime. The growing influence and power, and certainly the education of American women. I mean, in the world I live in, you think about it, today we have 3 women on the Supreme Court. And the short list for future Supreme Court justices is overloaded with women. We have a record number of women in the Congress, both houses. In my business, we have women now at the top of American media, and you can stop and think about people like Katie Couric, but also, you know, Megyn Kelly at Fox. Again, not Walter Cronkite, not David Brinkley, but now we have more women. And when I go to visit college campuses, some of the college presidents, college university presidents, they say to me, you know, when they think about affirmative action these days, they think about it for men. Not in terms of race, but just for men. And I say, well, why do you make the effort if the girls are the ones who are the best qualified, have the best grades? And they say simply, you know what? Girls like boys. They want the boys on campus. It helps us get better girls to have boys on campus. Now you talk about insulting. That's insulting. That's the only reason we're getting in? Oh my gosh. But in fact, more than half, it's almost now 2/3 of the people graduating from our colleges and universities are women. And if you go to the graduate school level, majority of students, with the exception of engineering and physics, are women. This is all part of a rapid change taking place in our lifetime. So your employees, your neighbors, the way that families are formed, who's bringing in the bacon in the family, everything is changing. Rapid, immediate change that's unsettling our society. And of course, the other end of this demographic picture is that we have baby boomers who are aging. Right now, about 20% of the population over the age of 65, and with the increasing numbers of retirements, we're going to have more and more people moving into that era. I can attest to that personally. And I wanted to know more about that population, and it won't surprise you, I went down to Florida and visited a senior citizen center. And very quickly, let me just tell you, when I was going into this center, there was this loud, raucous music playing, and I said to the lady who ran the center, she came out to take me and my crew in, and I said to her, you know, I don't know how we're going to do interviews with this terrible, loud music. She said, what terrible, loud music? Come with me. She took me into the courtyard, and there were 5 people. It was a band of 5 people just rocking out, all of whom, she said, are over 75 years old. And she said to me, you know, I see you on TV talking politics all the time, but I don't think you know anything about popular culture. Do you know what the top grossing rock and roll tour was last summer? This is a few years back. I said, I have no idea. And she started talking about Billy Joel. She started talking about Ringo Starr. I mean, Tina Turner, she said, was huge. But she said the top grossing rock and roll star in America was Bob Dylan. Now look, I don't know if you've seen Bob Dylan's face recently, but that's an old man. I mean, okay, so that's, and this is, you know, the rock and roll generation at a retirement home. And in fact, she said that group of people who were rocking out, making this noise to my ears, they couldn't even meet the demand. They are desired by everybody in Central Florida for every bar mitzvah, for every birthday party. Everybody thinks they're so hip and wonderful. But you go in and you talk to this group of seniors about their political concerns, and their political concerns are the high cost of prescription drugs, access to the best doctors, and of course wanting to preserve the integrity of Social Security and Medicare. And these folks read the papers, they listen to the news, they watch cable news TV, they're engaged in their communities. What a contrast to the younger generation that's not engaged with the news, that's not political, and their priorities are at variance with that younger generation. In fact, the biggest economic driver in that community is Disney. And when I went to talk to the folks at Disney about having so many seniors in their local area. They said they love the seniors, just can't do anything without them. They're employees. But they said, you know, when we want to expand, the seniors always say no. We wish the door had closed behind us when we moved to Florida. You go talk to the people in the mayor's office, and they say, well, you know, we love the seniors, they vote, they get involved. But then you say, what about investment in the community? And they say, well, they don't want taxes raised under any circumstance, so when it comes to building light rail or expanding the size of the highways, they don't want to do it. They just think it's a waste of money. And then you go and talk to people even in the congressional offices, and they say, oh, we love our seniors, they do so much. And they say, but we do have a problem with the schools. And you say, why is that? They say, well, you know, the kids in the school, you got a lot of these Hispanic kids, these black kids, you know, that's not their grandchildren. They don't feel good about those kids. Those kids scare them, in fact. I said, oh. And it just reminds you that we are in a moment when people talk about Republican and Democrat. They talk about racial diversity, you know, black, white, Hispanic. And so much of the difference in reality is about young and old in our society today, and varying needs of these two populations. Because remember, that younger population is much poorer. They do not have and have not had the opportunities that the older generation has had, and they're struggling. Much more reliant, in part because of broken families and the like, single-parent mothers, and immigrants, much more reliant on the social safety net, and much hungrier for trying to achieve that American dream. Meanwhile, the seniors are much more involved in trying to hold on to what has been their American success story, their American dream, their American way of life. I was thinking to myself that in a way it's a challenge for all of us to come to terms with this rapid change going on in American society. When I wrote a book about the civil rights movement, the book was called Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years. And people regularly would ask me, Juan, where'd you come up with that title, Eyes on the Prize? And I tell them it came from an old gospel song. And the song goes, keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. I know the one thing I did right was the day I started to fight, hold on. And what I would like to leave you with as we are here celebrating Community First Fund today is the idea that all of you are engaged in a fight to lead at a moment of incredible change, not only here in Lancaster, in this community, but a moment of tremendous transition in our nation. And just like a sculptor that's got a lump of clay in front of himself or herself, you got to put your hands into the muck and mire and try to shape something that's useful. That simply slamming the clay, pounding the clay in frustration or anger over the fact that there's so much change is not going to be satisfying. Instead, the great leaders of this moment are people who decide, you know what, I'm going to shape this change in order to make something useful and beautiful and lasting. And like Ted Kennedy, as I lay on my deathbed, I'm going to say, I spoke up for those who were in need, and I built something that's lasting and beautiful. I built a better Lancaster, York, Reading. I made this community a better place to live. Thank you very much.
So I do have some questions here that our guests submitted in advance, but something you just said I want to take you back to for a minute, which is you talked about that younger generation that you were talking to in those high schools. and you said they were not engaged, and that they didn't read newspapers, they didn't consume conventional journalism. And my question to you is, so what? Not in a flip way, but what are the consequences of that you see as a journalist? What does that portend for the future of our communities?
Well, initially my take is this is not good. They should consume the work I do. But what it means is they don't understand how the system works. And oftentimes they get resentful or they get frustrated in terms of lack of opportunity. You know, one thing my mother made very clear to me was, you have to work hard at school, you have to get good grades if you want to move up. And my mother did not have a high school education. But for these kids, not only oftentimes do they come from broken families, but they are in a sense broken in terms of understanding the way that you succeed in America. And I think we see it in terms of bad behavior, inability to respond to authority, and then we want to blame the police or whoever else, when in fact what you're seeing, I think, is breakdown, dysfunction. So my feeling is, for these kids, we as a community, and as you all as community leaders, have to really understand you're doing more than simply providing, let's say, an investment or a stable government. You have to work to engage people who are otherwise at a loss, at sea, in terms of how the system functions. And that can feel like an extra added burden, but again, it's essential if our communities are to have successful futures.
You also mentioned, I think what you said is, you live in a world of intense politics.
I do.
Every day. You're in that. And then you also talked about the issue of middle-class wage stagnation, income inequality, and I don't think there's any question that that issue is in the process of becoming politicized in a presidential election season. And the people you interact with, when the lights are off, when the cameras are off, what is your sense of how seriously they take that issue, and at a policy level or an economic level, how much real understanding there is of it, and how many real ideas there are in terms of beginning to address it going forward?
So in the world I live in, which is, Eric, very self-serving politically. I mean, the people just think they're playing hardball, they're playing to win. There is shock right now over the extent and power of this issue, because it's translated as populist politics. So on the right, when Donald Trump stands up and starts talking about income inequality and about the working man in America being left behind, you can see that people are like, wait a second, you know, we didn't expect this. And we certainly didn't expect it from Donald Trump, billionaire developer, right? But he is hitting a chord and talking about income inequality and about taxing the Wall Street, the hedge fund guys, aggressively. The Wall Street Journal can't understand it, doesn't like it. Right. Okay, we'll go on the left. I think a lot of people are surprised that a socialist, Bernie Sanders, would be talking about the same issue. Wait a minute, but how can Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump be on the same page? Forget the pedigree. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican, one says a conservative, one says a liberal. But this issue resonates across the political spectrum. And if you go deep into the polling numbers, if you go into the focus groups, talk to people about what matters in their lives at the moment, they're talking about, well, you know, I don't think my kids are going to do as well as I did. It's tougher to get a house these days, tougher to get a loan, tougher to pay for education. The kid has all these college debts to repay. This matters greatly to everybody now. Even people who are just about winning are coming to understand that if you are speaking to the American political mind at the moment, to have any relevance, you have to talk in terms of populism, and the populism is based on resentment, anger over lack of opportunity and lack of income equality.
do you hear serious ideas from those people about what they would do about that, presuming they win? Or do you, unfortunately, I would assume, hear slogans and advertising as opposed to serious policy ideas about what to do about it?
You're right. Let me just say in short, what you see is people playing on the anger and the sense of frustration with the way things are. So you have people who will play on the frustration. This is not the world I grew up in. Why is that? Is it that these new people are coming in, these new faces? And you'll have people who will play on that anger on both sides. Is it the rich? The rich are to blame. They're just looking out for themselves. The system is rigged. You hear this kind of rhetoric, and you'll see a lot of it in the campaign advertising that's to come. But you asked, Eric, about real ideas, and that's where people come up short. The most common answer that I hear that I think has some traction to it, some most realism to it, would be, we've got to do something about the schools. You can't give up on the schools, because if the kids don't have an education, essentially what we're doing is paying for them to go to the jails.
Yeah. You mentioned your book. You mentioned Eyes on the Prize, which was 1987. Believe it or not, we're coming up on 30 years since that was published. What's your epilogue today on that book from where you sit? If you were writing that book today, has your perspective changed at all based on, on what you were writing about at that time?
Well, that book is a history of the American Civil Rights Movement, 1954 to 1965. So right now I'm working on a book, and the book is about, I'll just tell you this idea, very much the elevator speech. It'll take 30 seconds, which is that, let's say the founding fathers somehow came back to life and are walking around downtown Lancaster, and they bump into Eric. And they say to Eric, Eric, there are two men walking there holding hands. Eric, what the hell is that? You can't do that. And you say, well, no, you don't understand. Gay marriage is legal. The Supreme Court has says legal. Then they say, Eric, look, the newspaper says that you've got women running for president in this country. And you say, yeah. In fact, the woman on the Democratic side is the leading candidate. They'd say, Eric, women couldn't vote. What is going on? And then they'd say, Eric, the U.S. military has troops stationed in Japan, in Korea, in Germany. What? They'd say, Eric, this is not the country we designed. Who built America in the 21st century? And the book is an attempt to answer who created the America that we live in every day. So going back to Eyes on the Prize, that was about talking about people who had shifted us from saying, it's natural that the blacks live here, the Irish live here, the Italians live there, that in fact there is positive benefit from diversity and people coming together as Americans. This book, I think, if it were an epilogue in a way, you think of a writer's work continuing to grow, is talking about how, in fact, we are in the midst of another civil rights revolution in terms of income inequality issues, in terms of women rising up in the society, in terms of the tremendous amount of change, and understanding where that change came from and where it's taking us, what kind of country we're going to be in the next century. In the short run, you could, if you're talking about just racial change, you could point to someone like the president and say, there's a black president. But I think in the long run, it's a much more nuanced or complicated story, because there's change in almost every area of American life. One of the people I write about in this book, for example, is the police commissioner in New York, Bill Bratton. Just the way we do policing is different today than it's ever been, with more data, for example. Or you think about the way women live, talking about someone like a Betty Friedan. Or you think about our concern with the environment, talking about someone like Rachel Carson. So I think you have to look at America and try to understand why we're at this point, what's driving us forward, and what we can be. And that's what I try to do in both of those books.
And I want to conclude by asking you one personal question. You made a reference to your mother teaching you the importance of education. Who are the key people in your life that provided the role models and the help to get you where you are today?
Gosh, there's so many. Gosh, you know, I just think my mother's story to me is so incredible because she had no education. She was working in the garment district in Lower Manhattan, but she used to bring me newspapers off the subway. And in New York, when I was growing up, they had like 7 daily papers. I mean, we're in an age where newspapers are going away. But because I was a big Mets fan, I would read different sports writers writing about the same ball game. And I'd say, you know, that guy didn't get in the locker room. That guy looks like he was drunk or something. He didn't get into this game. He didn't understand the key moment. This guy's really talking to people, you know. And I thought, well, I would love to be a writer. I would love to be able to tell these stories. And of course, you go from in terms of the tabloids, from the sports pages to where the real games are played in terms of the politics in the front of the paper. And so that had a tremendous influence on me. My dad trained fighters, and so I got to understand fear and victory and discipline and what it takes to be successful even if you are talented. So that helped too. But without a doubt, in terms of talking to the people in this audience, community leaders, you would be surprised how often in my experience in newsrooms that there's somebody who sees a spark of talent and hard work in you and doesn't say, oh, well, you know, I don't think that kid can do it, but instead says, I think you could be part of the future of this organization. I see how we could benefit by your success. What a difference that makes.
Well, what a difference that does make. And thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your time, your inspiration. And I would say to all of you as we leave here today, that's a great point to end on. You heard what Dan said, that the truth is in your hands. So go forth and do good work. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.